So here it is, next series, God Never Said That. You have probably, like me, been in a situation where you end up kind of going crossways with somebody. You ever done this? Like you think they said something and you go to kind of hold them accountable or to ask them about it, and they deny they ever said that. Now, you don't have to be married to experience this, but if you are married, you have experienced this, right? Like my wife and I, this is a weekly thing for us. We're trying to figure it out. Like how come we get in this little double bind here where I think she said one thing, she denies that she ever said that, and then we go at it. Now, sometimes we do that and it's really humorous, right? If it's something light, the trash, I didn't take it out, my socks are still on the floor or something, which I very seldom do, but I do that a little bit. That's humorous. However, you ever been in one of those binds where if it's a misunderstanding about the kids, like you didn't pick up the kids, that's going to be a bigger problem, right? If you don't pay attention, if goes crossways in communication, if somebody says something in a way that you didn't get it or you heard it differently, then that can create problems, right? And it can be, the bigger the misunderstanding, the bigger the problem. And sometimes those misunderstandings can lead to horrible, horrible results, right? And the problem I always have is if your personality is a little bit like mine, and maybe you've already figured that out, is I might know that we misunderstood each other, but have you ever doubled down? Like you probably misunderstood, but for some reason you get in a little bit of a tiff with someone, and I double down, like like you did not say that, and for some reason it just wells up in me. That's my personality. It's something I'm working on, but I'm just convinced that they're wrong and I'm right? And that kind of, what does it do? It leads to even bigger problems. So then we have relational hurt and pain and things like that. For the next 5 weeks, we're going to talk about this idea of things God never said. Now, I feel like this could be a series that could probably go for the rest of the year. So I may not pick something that you're thinking, hey, did God say that? If you want to email me some questions, I'd love to talk to you about some of the things you think maybe God never said. But we're going to pick 4, actually 5. I just expanded it last Friday to include 5 weeks. And I'm going to tell you the 5th week. Okay, I'm going to tell it to you. And then if I'm still here in 5 weeks, we're going to talk about this, right? In 5 weeks, if you want to be here, here's the topic. Women are to submit to men. See how quiet it just got? See, I don't even know if I want to be here in 5 weeks, okay? Now take it. Now, I want you to come back. Now, see, right now, the women are thinking they're not sure they want to come back. The men are thinking, I'm coming back because of the way he said it. Trust me, you are going to be very surprised maybe by what I say about what I believe is really in the scriptures. So I just kind of want to whet your appetite for that. I've got 5 weeks to prep that one. That one's going to be a mess. But here's where we're going today. We're going to start in a verse that I think is kind of the center of where this myth comes from. We're going to talk about today, this idea that God never said something. It's in the book of Psalms. Now, if you don't know the Bible very well, if you've never paid much attention to it, the book of Psalms is a collection of writings. It's poetry. It's actually songs that at one time were put to music and instrumentation. This book, if you will, for the last couple of thousand years, is a book that the church, the people of God, has used in worship. It's kind of like our song book today. So these songs we just sang, that's kind of what you get from the book of Psalms. Now, you get it in this really unique fashion. Because yes, it's the Old Testament. Yes, we're under the Old Covenant, right? So it's a different time before Jesus. But everything in the book of Psalms is wrapped in revealing and talking about the character of God. It's wrestling with everyday life. It's singing and revealing the greatness of God. And so the people of God would get together and they would sing these lyrics and these things in this book. So it was a very important book. Psalm 37 was written by a guy named King David. You say, well, what's the big deal there? King David is very unique because out of his lineage, out of his family line, comes Jesus Christ. In other words, Jesus was born in the family line of this guy, and that's what was predicted, that King David, out of his line, one day, somebody would sit on the throne with God and rule over God's people forever. Now, of course, when they were thinking about this, they actually thought it would just be a normal one of them. They didn't realize what was going to happen. But so King David's really important. And King David was a great ruler with a lot of problems. He messed up a lot. But in his thoughts, as he aged, he would write and think and meditate over the things of God. And Psalm 37 is one of those Psalms that he was thinking to himself, why is it that like these people who don't follow God, these people who kind of live however they want, these people that even do bad things or wrong things or hurt people, why do they seem to always profit? And then over here, there's this group of people and they follow God. They're dedicated and they're constantly trying to serve him and they're constantly trying to do the right thing for God. And it seems like they suffer. So that's what's going through David's mind. You can track this if you go this week and read all of Psalm 37. That's what's going on here. But look at verse 4 for just a second. He makes this statement. He says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. The New Contemporary Version says it this way. I didn't put it in your flyer, I don't believe, but it says, enjoy serving the Lord, and he will give you what you want. Like when you read that, if you have never heard anything about God, you kind of have one of those, I think, if you're like me, you kind of have one of those all-in moments. Like, well, I think I'm going to check out more about this God. Like, did you hear that verse? Did you hear the guy up front? He says, if I serve him, if I look towards him, delight myself in God, then you know what? I get anything. I get anything I want. Like in life, I will get anything I want. It's like it becomes a non-negotiable for me. Yeah, I'll serve you. If you're just going to let me have what I want, that's pretty cool, right? But this is one of the most abused verses in the scriptures. It's been pulled so far out of context. But what it does is it sets us up for this myth, the myth that God ultimately wants me to be happy. Notice how I'm saying it. The myth is this, that God ultimately wants me to be happy, that my happiness should be the center of my life. My happiness should be the center of everything that I pursue. My happiness should be the center of how I structure my day, structure my week, structure my life. And that I invest everything in being happy. Now look, I get it. I'm your pastor. I am a pastor. I've shepherded people for a long time. I love people. I don't like to upset people, okay? I like for people to be happy. It would really make my job easier if I could just say to you, that's what this verse says. Now, we're done for the day. Everybody go home and just be happy, right? We start singing the old Bobby McFerrin song. Nobody's going to know that because it's an old song. But it would be so much easier for me to just say to you, go be happy. That's what this whole thing is about, right? It would just make it easy. You don't want to mow the yard this afternoon? I had to mow the yard yesterday. You don't want to mow the yard? Don't do it. If it doesn't make you happy, don't do it, right? You don't want to fold the clothes? Don't do it. No elbows right now, ladies. No elbows. You don't want to do the housework? Don't do it, right? You don't want to clean the toilets? By the way, get this out. If somehow, like your love in life is cleaning toilets, could you just put a check mark down here? Because I really need to talk to you after this is over with. But you don't like cleaning toilets? Just don't do it, right? Because it's going to make you unhappy. If your focus is on your happiness, it really becomes simple math. Put this formula up there. Simple math. Here it is. If it adds to your happiness, add it to your life. If it takes away from your happiness, subtract it from your life. It's just simple math. It would make my job so much easier. I could stand up here and I could just tell you that, and then I could let you go, and we could just do whatever we wanted in life. And our focus would be happiness. You all know where I'd be, right? There's the dream right there. There's the dream right there. That gets edited, right? Later. We got to edit that out. There's the dream. If it's about happiness, there's the dream. Here's the question. Here's the question. If it really is about our happiness, here's the question I have to ask, we have to start with. What would you change if you believe God ultimately wanted you to be happy in this life? What would you change? What's going to drive your life if you believe God ultimately wants you to just simply be happy? See, it's a focus issue. What's going to change about your life? What do you need to change right now if happiness is ultimately what you should be focused on? Now, before we go any further, and before some of you think, oh, this is a depressing, I shouldn't have visited today. I can't believe we're having this, depressing conversation. He's about to pass around a sheet to sign up for martyrdom. That's not where I want to go. I do believe that God delights in his people. I think that you sitting here is a delight to God, not just because you're here. I think he delights in you. I think he delights in everyone. He delights in people. But it's a focus issue. If you think about the names of God in the scriptures, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but all through the Bible, there's all these different names of God. Yahweh is one of the ones. Jehovah. There's just multiple names over and over in the scriptures. And if you think about it, you start to think, well, why does he have so many names? Right? Like, do we not understand who he is? Well, here's the reality. How do you describe an eternal, omnipotent, omnipresent God? How do you describe a God who writes this whole thing, right? We have scientists, and I love science, and I don't think it contradicts the Bibles. And in fact, the Bible, I think the two can go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And here's the thing. I think that a lot of scientists are actually out there trying to prove how the universe works. And as they do it, they start talking about things like space-time continuum. And that's fascinating to me, because you start to think about how big this place is that we live in and how small we really are. And to me, that just adds to the value of what God is doing here on earth. Not everybody believes that way, but that's what it does. It fuels my energy. But think about it. Scientists are trying to describe how this whole place works, and the writers of the scriptures are trying to describe the person who set it all up. How do you describe him? How do you describe that God? The God who lives outside of the space-time continuum. He doesn't break it. He lives outside of it because he created it. How do you describe that God? Paul and Jesus start to use this phrase for God, this one name, Abba. It's an intimate name. It means Father. They describe him as Abba, Father. They talk to him as Abba, Father. Why? Listen to me. This is not a depressing message. When God says, I am your Abba, Father, he delights in you. Right? Two things. One, Abba, Father is not a slam on women. It's not a gender issue. It's a role issue. Two, the role of the father, there's not anyone on this planet who would say that a good father doesn't know how to care for his kids, right? A good father knows how to love his kids. A good father knows how to take care of his kids. And listen, no good father, now ladies, I know that we get some of this wrong sometimes, but no good father allows their 3-year-old to live strictly on ice cream, even though that makes the 3-year-old happy, right? You don't let your kid live on ice cream, even though the kid will say they're going to be happy. They're going to be happy until they throw up, right? But that just doesn't work that way. A good father knows there's a balance in what a kid has to eat. A good father knows that at 14, a child should not be driving on Highway 75, mostly because nobody should be driving on 75. But a good father knows the balance, right? A good father knows that at 16, when a kid wants to quit school, the thing is to encourage them to pursue the rest of that education, right? A good father knows, listen, that you can't give a kid everything just because they say it makes them happy. A good father knows how to use discipline, how to use structure. And Paul and Jesus describe God as Abba, Father. Why? Because he knows what's good for us. Even though there are things that may not always make us happy, he delights in us. Psalm 18. He brought me into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. He delighted in me. It's not the same thing as having my whole focus in life being my happiness. It's different, right? It doesn't mean he caters to my every whim. And the problem is, if that's what I believe, if I believe that God wants me to be happy in spite of everything, then here's the thing. It's going to start to create other wrong beliefs in my life. I want to build for you very quickly a quick theology of wrong beliefs that come from believing the myth that God wants me to be happy all the time, right? When we think our happiness is the ultimate goal in life, here's what happens. Number one, Whatever doesn't make us happy has to be wrong. If my happiness is the ultimate goal in life, then whatever doesn't make me happy, it's got to be wrong. If God wants me to be happy and something doesn't make me happy, it's got to be wrong. Sue and I, when we do premarital counseling with couples, and we've done that a lot over the years, we talk about marriage not as a contract, but as a covenant. Why? Because covenant in the scriptures originates from God. In other words, God set it up. And God sustains covenants. Over and over in the Bible, his people fall short. We break covenants over and over and over. But he never breaks the covenant. And that binds us to him. Right? We tell couples that the marriage is not about creating a contract where if one of you breaks the contract, then you both have an easy way out. Now listen, I understand. Some of you have experienced the trauma and the pain of divorce, and there is no judgment here. We talk about that all the time. Right? It's a broken world. Things happen. But the reality is just because something makes you unhappy in marriage doesn't mean it's wrong. And it's hard. It's hard to battle against that. But if you believe your happiness is the ultimate focus of your life, then whatever makes you unhappy is going to be wrong. Number two, whatever is not going right in your life means God is not at work in your life. If happiness is my ultimate goal, if it's my ultimate focus, then whatever's not going right, whatever's not making me happy, all of a sudden it means that God must not be in that. Right? All the discomfort, all the delays that I experience, all the obstacles, all the suffering, none of that can belong in the category of God is doing something good if happiness is ordained by God to be the focus of my life. If you ever get the privilege to listen to a missionary that served overseas, maybe in a country where they've served some prison time, I'm always fascinated. I've heard this story from several missionaries that'll talk about, I was in prison for X number of years, and that was the hardest and the sweetest time with God I've ever experienced. And when somebody says that to you, like in my life, that's a total disconnect. Like I don't want to be in prison for anything. I don't want to be away from my family, away from my friends. And yet when I hear a missionary talk about God sustaining them in that kind of a way, but see, if happiness is my ultimate focus in life, if that's what God wants from me, then that really can't be true. Number three, whatever makes me happy is what I begin to worship. See, the things that become my focus are the things that I begin to worship. Whatever's supposed to make me happy is the thing I'm going to pursue. It's going to make me worship it. Give it worth that it's not supposed to have. Number four, whatever else is going on in the world, I now become the center of my world. You see the steps? The more you believe this, the further and further you get away from the truth, and the further you get from God, and the further you get deeper down that rabbit hole, as they say. Until number five, whatever I may profess about the person of God, he now exists to serve me. When happiness is my focus, when happiness is my goal, the further I walk into that, the more I live it, the more everything is about me, including God. And he now becomes the one who exists to serve me. And we turn God into kind of this cosmic, Amazon Prime experience, right? That you can just shop God whenever you want things, and he'll deliver within the day, and it's all going to be cost effective, and you're not going to have to pay shipping, and it's all about you. See, that's where we go when we walk down this path. This is what this starts to yield in our lives, and all of a sudden we create a formula for God, and here's the formula. But God, I went to church, I prayed, I read my Bible for 5 minutes this week, I did all these little things, and now God, you should do for me the things that make me happy. And the problem is that leads to an even greater tragedy. And you know this because you've got friends like this. You've got somebody in your life that says, you know what, I tried God one time, I tried God, but I didn't get any happier. I tried going to church, but it didn't make my life any better because the focus was wrong. If God exists to make me happy and you are not happy, I am not happy, then God is the problem. God becomes the problem if that's my focus. It's about our pursuit. I want to take you to Peter in the last few minutes we have left. because I think Peter really responds to this. There's so many places we could go, but I just want to give you a solid place to land this week. If you go back and reread your notes or read these verses, start in 1 Peter 5 this week, or 1 Peter 1, but I want to go to verse 5 for a second. He starts to address this idea, this focus issue. I want to read you a verse from chapter 5. I don't think it's in your notes, but you can jot it out to the side. Chapter 5, verse 2. This is Peter kind of summarizing his little epistle, his little letter, and what has been going on. Here's what he says. By Silvanus, a faithful brother as I regard him, I have written briefly to you. In other words, he says, I wrote to you through this scribe Silvanus. Okay, I'm saying things to him. He's writing it down. He's very faithful. He says, exhorting and declaring that this is the true grace of God. He said, I wrote to you through this faithful servant. Here's what I wrote to you. I wrote to you some theological things. I wrote to you some doctrinal things. I wrote to you some good things about the person of God. I wrote to you the things God wants you to know about how to walk out your faith. And watch what he says at the very end. Stand firm in it. Now act. I wrote to you these doctrines. I wrote to you these truths. I wrote to you these things that you need to know. Now do something with it. See, his little letter is this, it's wrapped up in this way. He's saying, look, you need to pay attention. I'm giving you a new focus. I'm helping you figure this thing out. Now go back to chapter 1, and I want you to read what he says about this whole thing. Verse 13. Therefore, preparing your minds for action, here it is again, do something, and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. He's describing this inheritance. He's describing that this gospel, this message, this good news that Jesus has is a new way of understanding a relationship between man and God, between mankind. He says it's this salvation that God is offering through the person of Jesus Christ. You need to know that. You need to get ready to act on this, that this is what we're talking about. Verse 14, as obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. I love kids, right? Kids are great. They're not always very obedient, but they sure know how to get their way, right? Right? If they want something, what do? They take it. You want that toy? You take it. You ever go to the nursery later and just stick your head in and watch? And don't worry if it's your kid. I know your kid's great, but every kid does this, right? They see a toy, they want it, another kid has it. What do? They walk up and they take it. They just take it. And when they're little, that's what they do, right? They want ice cream. What do? They scream for it, and then we all scream for ice cream. Yeah, you're still with me. That's what kids do. But as they grow, what do? They learn obedience, right? They learn that mom and dad, when you speak, there's a certain tone in the voice, and when a tone hits a certain level, they begin to get more and more obedient, and they do it out of this relationship they have with the parent, right? They conform. He says, this is what we do. Verse 15, but as he who called you is holy, now watch this, because this trips us up, you also be holy in all your conduct, since it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. See, we read this, and you know what we do? We just panic. We just tighten up. Because I guarantee you, as I read that, some of you were sitting here and you were thinking about, wait a minute, but I just did, or I just thought, or on the way here I just argued about with my spouse, or I just yelled at my kid. We start to think about all the things that we've done wrong when we read this verse, and he's not trying to heap guilt on us. He's trying to teach us. There's this great salvation, this relationship that we can have with God, and it's being offered to us through the person of Jesus Christ. And because of that, we can be holy. You know what that word, that phrase means? We can be set apart. It does not mean perfect. He's not telling you if you messed up, then you need to start over again. We threw you out of the kingdom. Now you got to try to get back in. He's not talking about that at all. He says, look, this is life. And as you begin to focus on the person of Jesus Christ and who he is, as your focus changes off of you onto somebody else, here's what's going to happen. You're going to learn to be holy. You're going to learn to be set apart. They used to do this in the Old Testament. They would take, when the temple was still set up, and the temple worship was very, very structured and ordered, and they would take certain utensils, bowls, knives. And if they needed a bowl in the temple, they would take that bowl. They would have this little consecration ceremony where they would take it and kind of dedicate it to God. And basically now that bowl would be taken out of normal daily routine. It would no longer appear on the daily lunch table, and it would be put in the temple, set apart for something different. He's inviting us to change the focus, to begin to understand that we've been set apart for the holiness of God, to walk out the plans of God, to be the arms and legs of God in this world. Not to be perfect, to be holy, to be set apart. And look how he says it happens, verse 17. And this gets a little scarier too. And if you call on him as Father who judges impartially according to each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your exile. I love that. So as you're living out and abroad, as you're living in the thick of the place where people don't serve God, conduct yourselves with fear. Verse 18, knowing that you are ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. Some of you, the idea of fearing God causes you to cringe. Right? The idea of fearing anything, because you've had experiences where you've had some real fear in your life. And so to put fear in God in the same sentence, it just doesn't make sense. In fact, if you know and read a lot of the rest of the Bible, you start to get a little confused because it talks about Christians and their joy. It talks about Christians and their confidence in God. And how does joy and confidence and fear all stack up? Well, it stacks up when you begin to understand that it's not about terror. This is not a phrase of horror. It's an invitation into relationship. It's an invitation into respect. Yes, God is all powerful. Yes, he's the judge. Yes, he's in control of all life. Yes, if he wants to, he could wipe out the universe with just his breath. But he's invited us into relationship. He's invited us to walk without terror, but with respect. He is Abba Father. Good fathers don't want to strike horror into the hearts of their kids. And neither does God the Father. He desires the best. So our confidence is in him. I had this dream this week. I told my wife I don't always do this, but I had this dream this week, and I was on the road. Maybe there's something there. If you know me long enough, you know that my driving experiences are not always nice. But I was driving on the road, and cars in front of me were having wrecks. And I would pass a car as it had veered off into a rail, and I could see the driver was pinned badly. And I would drive, and there was this fear in me, this not terror, but this sense that the car is powerful. And if I don't have respect for the car, that I could just as easily have a wreck. But if you have respect for the car, and if you're careful, right, then you can utilize the power of the car, and it's a healthy fear. God invites us into a healthy fear. Where does our focus come from? It comes from getting to know God and from that healthy fear. Not a terror, a healthy fear, a respect that informs all of my life. Proverbs 1 verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. I love Proverbs because it's just, if you don't know that book, it's just short little pithy statements that are general truths. In other words, they're not trying to make some broad declaration that you take it to court. This is just a general truth. He says, the fear of the Lord, the respect of the Lord, the understanding who he is drives all of my focus in life. It informs my life. It informs how I behave. But fools despise that kind of wisdom. God desires my actions to reflect my realization that I'm a part of his kingdom. That's what he's inviting me into. God desires my actions to reflect my realization that I'm a part of his kingdom. So we started the morning and I asked this question. What would you change if you believed God wanted you to just be happy in this life? What would that look like? But here's the real question we need to close with. What changes when you discover that God ultimately desires you to be like his son? What's going to change now? When you discover that God is Abba Father, that he has provided a way of salvation, that he is loving us, that he delights in us, but that our own happiness cannot always be the focus of our life. What's that going to look like? When we discover that his son was self-sacrificing all the time, always focused on loving others, was not pursuing the things of this world. It's not that he didn't have them. It's not that he didn't use them. It's not that you need to sell your house, sell your car, get rid of your high-paying job so you can take a low-paying job. That's not it at all. God uses all of that. The question is, what's our focus? What needs to change this week when you discover that God ultimately desires you to be like his son? That your focus needs to be on him, not on happiness. Your focus needs to be on holiness, not on happiness. What needs to change if you picked one thing? Instead of praying right now, I want to turn your attention to the screen. We found a really great little video, and they're going to run it. And as they run it, I want you to just sit, read the words, and think about this. What needs to change in my life? What is it that God's asking of me? Watch this.